In tonight's Dateline Defense, Al-Qaeda and the U.S. prison at Guantanamo. Today, the terrorist group posted a 22-minute audio message on the internet. Their leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri, says his network will spare no effort to free prisoners at the facility. For more now, we turn to our guest tonight on Capitol Insider, Cedric Leighton. He's a military intelligence officer, retired U.S. Air Force colonel, and president of Cedric Leighton Associates. Thanks for joining us, Cedric.
My pleasure, Mike. Thanks for having me.
So is this simply propaganda, or should we consider it an overt threat against Guantanamo?
Well, you always have to take something like this somewhat seriously. Now, I don't think that Ayman al-Zawahiri or Al-Qaeda actually have the logistical or technical capability to raid Guantanamo or to mount an assault on Guantanamo. But what they can do is they can encourage the inmates at Guantanamo to actually go in and cause a lot of havoc. They're already doing that, obviously, with the hunger strike and other things that they've done throughout the years that they've been in prison down there. But that's the main thing, is that they can foment an internal disturbance that is greater and more dangerous than the ones that they've already done. That's the primary danger, and that could happen, and that's what they should be on guard against right now.
How would they do that? How would they communicate that to them?
They can do that several ways. Most of the inmates there have some degree of access to the outside world, and because of that, there are ways in which they can get messages from Al-Qaeda Central to them. Now, it's much more difficult than it was in the past, and the likelihood of something like this succeeding is very, very small, but it is still a possibility, and that's why our folks have to be very, very careful down there that they don't engage in a full-scale rebellion down there.
Well, we've already seen this year many of Gitmo's 166 prisoners started a hunger strike to protest conditions and their indefinite confinement. So do we know what kind of footprint Al-Qaeda has among those inmates?
Well, all of them are basically either Al-Qaeda or fellow travelers with Al-Qaeda. So ideologically, they're already predisposed to the whole Al-Qaeda program. They are predisposed to every single element of the Al-Qaeda philosophy, the Al-Qaeda way of looking at things, and Al-Qaeda operations. In many cases, a lot of these prisoners have had some idea of how they would behave if they were ever captured by U.S. or other allied forces. And that's how they exercise influence and command and control over these people. It's basically a long-term, not immediate, but long-term way of controlling them, and it's a very different control mechanism than we use for our military.
From a political perspective, President Obama recently renewed the effort to close Guantanamo, but he still faces a lot of opposition in Congress. So do you think that this new threat from Al-Qaeda complicates things for the president, giving conservatives ammunition to say, you know, you're now bowing down to the terrorists?
Oh, most certainly. From a political standpoint, it's very, very difficult to avoid that kind of perception. So the president is going to try to avoid being painted into a box when it comes to Guantanamo and the idea of actually shutting down Guantanamo. That, oddly enough, was not only a goal of the Obama administration, but also of the Bush administration in its final years. So the way that they are going to try to play this, I think, will be based on their ability to move these inmates to these detainees to a different area, but that's going to obviously hit a lot of resistance, not only from any national leaders on the Republican side, but also from state and local officials if they're moved to a federal prison in a particular area or even other facilities. So it remains to be seen exactly how far they'll actually go with this.
If we could, let's shift our focus now to Syria. Today, government troops launched a full assault on Khan al Assal, a village on the outskirts of Aleppo. Rebels captured that very same town just 1 week ago. So why strategically is that location so important to both sides?
If you look at it solely from the aspect of where it's located on the map, it is a town that is, as you mentioned, right on the outskirts of Aleppo. Aleppo is Syria's largest city, and it also is basically located in an area where several major roads converge. So this village is really poised to be in a strategic crossroads, and from that standpoint, it becomes important for either the rebels or the government forces to control it. They're looking at it from a strategic standpoint. Plus, the other thing is the rebels have indicated that they want a victory. They need a victory before they will go and engage in peace talks with the Assad regime. And so from that standpoint, it's important not only politically, but militarily as well.
They want some momentum there. Well, in March, that same town was a scene of what both sides are calling a chemical attack. And earlier this month, the United Nations reported it's received 13 reports of alleged chemical weapons use in Syria. Is this unusual? Are we witnessing something new in Syria?
Well, the fact that 13 different reports showed up for Khan al Assal as being a possible site of chemical weapons employment is unusual in and of itself. Now, the fact that you've mentioned the whole chemical piece is another reason why Khan al Assal is so important. It is important because if you control it, you then control the investigation into the chemical weapons disposition and whether or not chemical weapons were employed in this case. There are estimated to have been upwards of 150 Syrian soldiers who were killed in the rebel attack on Khan al Assal. And those soldiers may have been witnesses to a chemical attack. That is what one side is saying. The other side is saying that they need to control the town because it is important from not only the peace talk standpoint, but also because it allows them to then talk to the UN directly and really govern the pace of the investigation into the chemical weapons attacks.
Before you go, I'd like to get your take on the defense budget. The Pentagon faces a $52 billion cut in 2014 if Congress and the White House fail to compromise on a deficit cutting plan. How might that impact U.S. Cyber Command?
Well, U.S. Cyber Command is one of the more protected entities within the federal government, and it stands to, at least before these latest cuts were raised as a possibility, it stands to benefit from the fact that we are very concerned about cyber activities, cyber attacks, the whole cybersecurity aspect. So that is in Cyber Command's favor. What is not in Cyber Command's favor are the revelations of Edward Snowden and others that have come out and talked about exactly what NSA does with data and with data mining. Now, some of the allegations are not correct, some of them are unfounded, but enough has come out that is correct that really gives a lot of people pause. So there may be a budgetary impact on U.S. Cyber Command because if you start cutting the actual forces that put iron on target, then you have a situation where you also have to look at what is commonly known as the tail part of the tooth-to-tail ratio in the military, and that tail part includes the intelligence agencies and Cyber Command. So none of them are invulnerable to cuts, but I believe that Cyber Command will be less likely to face cuts than other entities. Doesn't mean they'll be immune, but it does mean that they are less likely to be handed a meat cleaver instead of a scalpel.
Colonel Cedric Leighton, president of Cedric Leighton Associates, thanks so much.
You bet, Mike. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.